All right, I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Commissioners for February 27th, 2018. And if you would, please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence. Thank you. One change to the agenda, the recognition for Marion Morton will be moved to the next meeting, but other than that, the motion or the agenda is as presented. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Guys have it. Okay, public comments on items on the agenda. Ms. Candace DeFinis would like to talk about the resolution on parks.
Good evening. My name is Candace DeFinis. I live at 8313 Willow Branch Drive. And since our last meeting and since my last public comment, I took the time to go through and calculate the number of acres that are on the inactive park list. And we have approximately 95 and change acres that are on the inactive park list. And while I think that this resolution is working towards going in the right direction, and I'm grateful that we're moving in the right direction, I really do think that we need to consider, and I understand the conversation that was had last week, that there are some issues about having conservancy easements and trying to protect that land, but I really want to dig a little bit deeper. As you continue to peel back the onion, I want to understand and why we can't take those actions to protect the land that we have, to protect that 95 acres that we have. Again, I want to say thank you, because I do think that this is a great first step, but I want to understand how we can make sure that it's protected for all citizens of Waxhaw for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Next item up is some old business, animal control ordinance. We'll turn this over to Chaplain Spencer, our town attorney, and I believe Chief Ice will join you as well.
Yes, Chief Ice is here to answer any further questions. If you look at the revisions, there's some red line changes, and it looks like a lot of changes, a lot of revisions, but when you peel that first layer, you look at it, most of it's reorganization. We had a lot of provisions that were just outdated. We also have our animal control officer is a police officer, so we don't need the 3 or 4 statutes that pertain to jurisdiction and access and interfering with the animal control officer, because if they do that, they're interfering with the police officer, which is a higher and greater offense. There are also a lot of duplicative state law provisions. We included them in our ordinance, but they're enforceable under state law. State law is going to preempt, and it just added to confusion. So we deleted those. The main area with real changes pertains to the dangerous dogs. Several years ago, we had several instances, and the current dangerous dog ordinance classifies a dog as dangerous or potentially dangerous, and if it's dangerous, states that you have to remove the dog. There's little discretion, and it also resulted in several hearings in a row before this board. And after enforcing that for several years, the animal control officer went and looked at some other jurisdictions and came up with some ideas, and he's like, what about some flexibility? Because a dangerous dog can happen one time, but we had a dangerous dog, and Chief Ice will remember this one. It was the 3-legged Chihuahua. And by the statute, yes, and he got asked that question of what kind of dog and how many legs, but this dog had bitten multiple people, and one time it was somewhat severe, but that was a case where if you had more flexibility, we probably could have done a little bit more. So what we tried to do was become a little bit more pragmatic with enforcement. We still have for the more severe actions, we have all the enforcement rights. But you look at it and the animal control officer will apply the facts to the situation and make a recommendation. And if it's a very severe recommendation, then it can go to the appeals board. Originally, that was this Board of Commissioners. We have recommended that to the Board of Adjustment. You'll have enough matters with zoning and everything else. We saw where some other jurisdictions have done that. And people will still have their right to be heard if they want to go through that process. So this really is to allow more flexibility. And I think the last thing we did was change the fines with enforcement. So we start with monetary fines. But if those aren't paid, then we step up and allow it to be a misdemeanor, because there was some statements about some of the violations, people didn't want to have a misdemeanor on their record, and that's the enforcement mechanism. So this would allow them to pay the fines and move on. And I think this is just more about cleaning everything up, flexibility and simplification, because of a lot of the duplication we had. And this hasn't been updated in several years. And we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chief Ice, do you want to add anything?
No, raise
Dude, from the-
And that does give us the flexibility. We can charge them on a civil citation, much like a parking ticket. If they don't pay the fines off of that, then we have the option to go back and charge them on a state citation. We also raised the fines, or the fees for registration. I mean, it was $3, and it was costing us more to process the registration than it was actually to register the dog. So we raised that up to, I think it's $10 and $20, based on if it's neutered or spayed or not.
15 and 20.
And that's mainly the changes that we made.
Commissioner Burrow, do you have any questions?
No, I read it and I was happy with it.
Okay. Commissioner Westlake?
I do. This is the first time this board's gotten a chance to look at this, and I know you and I have talked about some things. I don't know how much we can add or change at this point, because I know it's gone through the attorneys and things. I saw a couple of things that I would like to have the board discuss. One thing would be on the amount of time that a dog is allowed to stay in cars. We have it set at 20 minutes. I was hoping we could change that to 10 minutes, just from some research that I've done on that, as far as, I guess once you get above 10 minutes, then the temperature can get above 114 degrees. And so that was just one of the things that I was wondering if we could discuss changing. Also, as an additional...
Perhaps there's a question,
Okay.
question in there, in that, how did you come to the 20 minutes? And
There's a fine line there. I mean, when we get a call like that, the officer's going to be faced with, if the owner's not around, knocking the window out of a car. You know, there's a lot of property damage that can be done with that. And weighing out both sides, we just felt that the 20-minute timeline would be fair on both parties, on both sides. We can certainly look at it if that's something that the attorney wants to take on, but I felt that was admirable.
I believe that the 20, you may have found the 10 or 15 in some others, but I think we saw the 20 minutes in some other ordinances as well, and we tried to follow those.
I
But
think-
it's a board decision.
Right.
ultimately.
My purpose here is to be more proactive rather than reactive, and not necessarily look at what other towns in North Carolina have done. It's more of, this is more about protecting animals. And so, you know, when research is showing a time limit, that's where I come up with where we need to be doing things that are protecting the animals as well.
I think a lot of it too is officer discretion. When the officer gets there and gets called out there, obviously we don't know when that time started.
Yeah.
So the officer looks and sees the animal in distress, the officer's gonna make that decision to do what he's gotta do to save the animal, or a baby in that
Exactly.
instance. So, I mean, I think, like I said, there's a fine line there on what we can do. I think we put a timeline in there because we needed a timeline, but at the end of the day, the officer's got discretion to do what he's gotta do.
So if they can tell that the animal's about to pass out, they can go ahead and break a window, so the time limit's not necessarily as important as just what they see, okay. Another, thing that I was hoping we could add, is temperature outdoors. You know, we just had this recent snowstorm. There were stories within the county of animals dying because they were left outside when it was under the freezing temperatures. And I realize there are no ordinances in North Carolina that apply to that, but I have seen them in other states. And I was hoping that we could take the lead in the hopes that others will follow, that we would have an ordinance to require animals to be brought into some type of enclosed facility when temperatures reach below freezing, or 20 degrees, or something like that.
In that one, I probably would want to research more, because you have different animals that can sustain different temperatures. I know that I have a very short-haired black dog, and she's a wimp. But my neighbor's dog is we call it a frou-frou dog, a fancier breed. But she goes out there, and it'll be below 20 degrees, and she is on the front porch. And we're like, why don't you do something about your dog? They're good friends and all. She loves it out there. She's got a lot of hair, and there's something in her breed. So you have a lot of breeds that can actually handle it.
So in the frame of a question to you, Chief, is there some guideline that you've seen across?
Well, I think he's right. I think the reason the state, and again, we're going off of state law on this, which requires food, water, and shelter. Some dogs can handle it more than others, but I think the good Lord is taking and giving a lot of these animals to where if you give them a dog house and some hay in their dog house with some shelter, that animal's going to be able to survive the temperatures we have around here. I mean, the coyotes and the bunnies and everything else that are out there are surviving that. So I think that is an area that I think there's going to be a whole lot of what ifs if you start adding into that on what type of dog it is. I mean, there are dogs that have never darkened the inside of a house. So, I mean, and they're acclimated to that. You know, again, I think you got discretion that if you get a call out to a house where an animal is suffering, then the officer has a discretion to take care of that and charge appropriately.
So within the ordinance, there's not a whole lot of detail about the shelter that's required, but I think because you're referring to the state, probably a state law on that, but I'm wondering if it would be helpful to include that within our town ordinance as well, just so that, because if our residents are looking at our town ordinance specifically, may not even realize they need to go to a state ordinance just to see what's required for shelter. I mean, could we include that?
If we start getting into specifics, that can take longer and be more detailed oriented. What is a dog house? Can it be a homemade dog house? Most of the time, shelter is to keep the animal out of the elements, and here, most of that is going to be shade. Our predominant problems are shade and then maybe some rain, and that's going to be something to, above the surface. And I think we start getting more challenged if we're going to, what kind of dog house, and then some people are going to have, well, the dog can go up underneath the deck, or they can go underneath a leaning post.
Basically, we're looking at something that's going to protect them from the elements.
And these they're good questions, but they get harder once you try to, if you get too many details, it gets harder when you go to apply it. And everybody shouldn't have to buy a dog house, because sometimes there's other forms of shelter. Some dogs can get up underneath the house, which wouldn't be a dog house. They'll have a door, and now oftentimes it's garages.
I mean, what do you do with a house that's got a dog door that the dog can come in and out, just doesn't want to go in the house?
That, we can look into that one a little bit further, and I'd like to do that.
We're not in the
off-
deliberation stage, just yet, so. You have
Well,
additional questions?
those were my three,
Okay.
yeah, my three areas I just wanted to discuss. But
Commissioner Lee? Commissioner Burns?
I have one question where you changed the tethering from the immediate vicinity of the dog to 2 hours within a 24-hour period. So what was the reason? Is that just flexibility?
The reason we did that is to allow, say, that they're in a kennel,
Okay.
and they need to clean the kennel out, and they need to tether the dog somewhere to where they can clean the kennel out and make it clean and presentable for the dog.
Mayor Pro Tem? Two questions for you. One, page 6. Just seems like 5 business days, they have to file an appeal and the town manager gets 10 days to respond. Seems a little bit, can you explain that?
I agree in statutory. That is
It is statutory?
That is
Okay.
following the North Carolina, and it's within 10 days that they have to set the hearing. It actually allows the appeal. You could reduce the appeal time to 3 days, but the 10 days for.
Okay, as long as it's statutory, that's all I,
And we discussed those points, and I think the intent there is the state wanted you to move forward if you're going to be in, because you can impound a dog depending on the circumstances, either by taking it to the shelter or within the house. And I don't think they wanted people to wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks, or longer. I think there was a movement for that to have it
I
quick.
just saw the inconsistency, I just was curious. Second item is on page 10. Just seems like, why do we allow 5 offenses before we move forward? Why do we allow so many repetitive offenses?
Now, that is going to be different with the dangerous dogs because there's a separate provision for that. What you're going to have on your 5th offense is something probably like barking, more of a nuisance, another violation, or having the dog off of the leash law violations, or something a little bit less
Okay,
dangerous, but we have a separate provision under the dangerous dogs, and it can be one strike depending on the severity.
okay. Any thoughts, comments, motions, emotions, deliberations? What would you like to do? I'll give you my opinion. I think we're in a position that this has gone on for a while. I think there's some good questions here that we can look to enhance the ordinance after we get one in place, but in my opinion, we've waited a while for this, and we need to get a foundation in it.
I'll make the motion to approve the ordinance number 2018006, regulating animals.
We have a motion to approve the animal control ordinance. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it, 5-0. Thank you, Chief. Next item up, licensing ordinance, new business, licensing ordinance for alcoholic beverages. And we'll go back to Chaplain Spencer again.
And this one is a bit simpler, and maybe my writing and description should have made it appear that way. The town had a general business license code that included the beer and wine under our alcoholic beverages, the charges. Under state law, we had to repeal all of those, but there's another state statute that does allow us to charge for the beer and wine. The amounts set forth in this ordinance, because that may be one of the next questions, can we charge them higher or different amounts? It's all statutory, so this is merely following the North Carolina statutes to allow us to have that additional charge. There are still additional charges to the state for the state licensing and permit fees that will be charged. The businesses are paying them now, but this actually gives us enforcement provisions if they aren't paid. So this is following one of the limited licenses that the state gave us back to charge for, and this is just to put it in our code so people are put on notice, so they don't come back and say, well, it wasn't in your code book, we didn't know, which would be a defense. So we wanted to put it on notice and put some provisions, and we did try to keep it simple enough. Our last business code was, the business license code was probably 12 to 14 pages, but it had a lot of different provisions, and they have to have their state license, and if they aren't paying ours, we're going to coordinate with the state as well.
Mayor Pro Tem McMillan, any questions? Commissioner Burns, Commissioner Lee, Commissioner Westlake, Commissioner...
Yes, I have two. When you talk about the retail tax, and this is on section 110.03, two things here. It seems to me like a $15 tax for on-premise. Do you actually cover your costs with a $15 tax? Does it cost us more to go after this tax than we get back from it?
These, I've been informed, are incredibly easy to collect because they're used to paying them, and they also have the state fees. They're due every May, set by statute, and they come in pretty much automatically. And the most enforcement time we've had is making a phone call, and they've gotten paid.
Okay, and then in that same section in B, it says, every person engaged in the business of selling malt beverages shall pay an annual license tax as follows. Is that the owner? Is that the bartender? Is that the waiters, the waitresses? What is every person?
Wonderful question, and what you don't have here is Chapter 10 where we have definitions, and if you look, person is italicized, so it's a defined term. And in the general provisions of our town code, we have definitions, and in that one, it's defined as, it's per location, but it's per person, but it's only one person per location. But we define the person as a legal entity, a LLC, an entity doing business, a corporation, but that is a defined term, and actually looked at that as well because we've got to have that definition, so then I went back to a separate section in our code book.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, motions?
I'll make a motion to adopt the ordinance 2018-0005, regulating licenses of alcoholic beverages.
We have a motion to adopt the ordinance. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, 5-0. Okay, reports. We'll go left to right here. Just a couple things to mention. Our partners at the Waxhaw Volunteer Fire Department lost a brother, Michael Starnes, a fire engineer and past president of the board of directors at age 33. To benefit the family of Michael Starnes, the Waxhaw Fire Department Auxiliary is doing a fundraiser this Saturday, a spaghetti dinner at the firehouse, Saturday, March 3rd, 5 to 7. If you can't make it, they're accepting donations, but it was a tragic loss for them, and just wanted to make the community aware of it. Second item for all of us, sent you all a note. Town Hall Day is May 23rd in Raleigh, where we will spend time with our legislative contingent. It's their short session, so we have to have a very targeted message. Commissioner Westlake and myself and Manager Ferguson sat down yesterday to go through the League of Municipalities legislative agenda and have begun to tailor it to Waxhaw so we can bring it back to the board and have a good discussion and reach some consensus in March on that, so we're all ready for May. And then lastly, Commissioner Burns and myself have begun to, or we're going to start on Monday, to do our annual work on fine-tuning the boards and committees procedures manual. We've done this together the last couple of years. We take what we've learned and bring it back to the board with improvements. So that's what I have as reports. Mayor Pro Tem McMillan.
My report consists of this past week going to the Central Council of Government, where I attended and participated in an effective grant writing workshop program, which entailed getting information regarding state, federal grants, where money is available and where funding can be obtained by the town for various activities, including parks, recreation facilities, transportation activities, anything that's needed. There's a number of places where we can look that we can avail ourselves of obtaining funding. It is a process and procedure that we need to stick to and adhere to. There are guidelines, information. I've shared some of this information already with our town manager. I will share it with the rest of the board once we meet again regarding those fundings and sources that are available. But it is, and if anyone is interested in finding out, you can always reach out and contact me on any of the days that I'm at the Duncan McDonald House, or email me, and we can set up a different time. I did meet with citizens again this past Saturday. I had Saturday hours that I availed myself and shared information with those who did come out to speak to me. And this coming month, I will have evening hours as well in the month of March at the Duncan McDonald House.
Commissioner Burns? Commissioner Lee? Commissioner Westlake?
No, just in addition to working with you yesterday on the legislative agenda and also talked to the mayor and town manager about working on some possible public transportation options. So I'm hoping that's something we can do. I've also attended 2 ribbon cuttings the past week, Refresh and Carousel Art Studio, both in the Millview Shopping Center. So check those out, and that's all I have.
Nothing.
Manager Ferguson?
This Saturday, there's a fundraiser for the Desmond Park facilities. It's a big long-term, and there's still more spaces available for additional teams that might want to sign up, particularly for the kids team. So kids out there that want to sign up for a team, there's some space.
I was getting nervous. You were looking at us, and I didn't know what you were getting at there.
There are a couple slots too, but the kids team are in need of a couple more. Then tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. will be the first session for Waxhaw 101. There'll be about 8 weeks where we'll be going through a civic education process for 15 residents who've signed up and will be participating. So we're excited about that, and we'll go through the town operations from A to Z and host those here in this building and then at some other facilities around town. And we'll go through a number of sessions there. They'll be informative and have a lot of information. So that starts tomorrow evening. And then lastly, there is Thursday a senior coffee at the Duncan McDonald House from 10 to 12. And the topic is Union County's aging office, and they'll be there.
This Thursday?
This Thursday. And that's
Thank
it.
you. Okay. General public comments. Candace DeFinis? You're good? All right. With that, we have no other topics, so I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Captain, you owe me.